It's time to talk to one of my former students today, respond to one of his points. Can you talk about drawing as experienced in both mass drawing and direct painting? Aspects that I'd love to review or have clarification on include length of line to go for, based on how much one can remember and get a concept of, how many bumps versus the general sweep, etc. So these are just in-house questions. I mean, do you understand these things? But actually, if you listen, if if this isn't too private, this is just too much club language, then you might turn this off. But actually, you might try listening for a second. I'm going to show you. I'm going to have one image on this one. We're going to keep referring back to. But one of the points that Sargent makes is he says, draw as long a line as you can, and he's suggesting as long as you can remember. And so you're trying to hold on to a line and draw. And so he says, so the length of line, he wants to know that, how many bumps, and et cetera, and the general sweep. The discussion of the general sweep, before I forget, that's an angles problem, right? And it's mostly about that. If you're talking generalities, you at least should get the angle right. Say you're looking at me and you gash off this thing or some big angle. But we're talking about a combination of things, right? Anyway, let's look at an image. And then we're going to look at Benson again. Benson I like to look at because it's made the way we think, right? It's the way this process actually works, the visual order process, the drawing of the significant line. Now, don't be bowled away or misunderstanding the fact that this actually looks like a long, continuous cutout. And don't be thinking he did that everywhere and then somehow sort of fuzzed up the edges. He actually didn't. And everybody wants to know that, who's thinking like us, right? From the very beginning, it's the look of nature at points, right? Now, for you, Dan, the top and bottom are the key points, right? And so how long a line? Well, you have to have a long enough line to give yourself a point, right? So you have to be going down and turn a corner, right? That's the first part of how long a line, right? Now, as long as you can remember, it has other points to it, and that is, if that's the word, it has other elements to it. The longer you hold a line, let's say the longer a line you hold, the more continuity you'll have. Let's say the more the parts will be correlated. They'll be of each other, right? So it helps to learn a line, not just hack angles, but actually learn a long line. So you can feel the curve here, extending straight and then doing this other sharper bend, that sort of thing. So a memorized line, a long line has more. It's a more integrated, the points become more integrated with each other in that look, right? I like to say it's like memorizing a poem. If you say the phrase instead of saying the word, the way, crow, that's not going to be memorable. But you say, and you memorize the way a crow. And then the next phrase is shook down on me, right? And that's a long line. That's just a relatively long line. And don't get ambitious. Don't memorize such long lines that it's like some game in itself. I mean, we're just trying to get through a painting in a successful way in which, the longer the line, the less it floats, by the way. So you have to have a certain shortness so that it floats adequately. So it's setting out there and you don't mind moving it a little bit. The longer, the more bumps, the more stuff you have information on a line, the more difficult it'll be to even think you're going to move the thing. So somewhere in there, right? You see what I'm saying? Is that place. So. But it is conclusive that when you start talking about a line, that the bumps really matter. I say the points more than anything, right? So when this comes down over to the shoulder over here, comes down here and then goes up there, that point is something you can align things with. Or when you're drawing this, say you come down here and turn that corner, that point is useful. This lostness, not so much. But so it's always like that. You're always coming around and turning a corner, finding a point, right, and articulating the look of it in the spot. In the beginning, we do top and bottom, by the way. And so the shape here, how long can you remember that? You should be able to hold that in your memory. Even the look of nature, the relative softness of it. And the same thing with whatever you choose on this side. So you have these points. So you have enough of a bump to make a point with. In other words, we think of them as points, but it's actually a shape that has a bend that can be held to as a locator, both vertically and horizontally, right? And then your job, of course, because you have those points, you should be able to easily get the angle right between the two of them. So I don't know if that's all you were asking. Let's see if that was it, Dan. Yeah, and let's deal with this question. Oh, yeah, versus the sweep. So So you see that he doesn't do construction drawing. He isn't just gashing big sweeps down here and gashing, 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 that sort of thing. He isn't doing that, right? He's articulating points and waiting for the next point. He's actually into a long, so he draws this line as like as he can, but he's really into getting this point and whatever point. You see what I'm saying? So there's no sort of preliminary gashing for most of these guys, and certainly not very much to whatever extent there is. Tarbell does it a little more than Benson. But I'm not really that guy who wants to rule out everything. There are days and times when that's actually the best plan. It isn't. I haven't found it to be routinely the best one though. So, um, yeah. So in the category rather of blocking, you have people like Harold Speed, and of course the Barg appearance of the Barg, which I don't really think is a method. I think it's just demonstration of stuff. But so let's go to the next one. Okay, so can you talk about drawing as experience, both mass and direct painting, mass drawing and direct painting? And then he wants us to review number 2, relating points or effects, both in distance and alignment. Well, we just started doing that already, didn't I? So relating these points. So you make your points, so that would become a point. Anything you can use over here, even that bend there, that going around would become a point. Get the angle right between the two, right? I tell you, the first 2 points you have to get are a top and a bottom, and they have to be fixed vertically. You have to say, I want it exactly here vertically. And I say top and bottom if it's a long picture. If it's a wide picture, I do a left and a right point, the most extended points. And I just set up some points out there. I said, you're going to be my proportions. And so it's important to get the angle right between these 2 points, right? That's the alignment he's talking about. And that's the Sargent conversation, points and angles. But the point has to be actually a point, not just a shape doing something or other. It's got to actually have a pointness that you can actually refer to, right? And mean something specific by. So if you say points and you get these top and bottom, you say top and bottom, and you mean points, and you articulate this much of this one without all the rest of it, without turning it into something. And then you say, now I'm going to get this one because you're now looking for a significant width. Now you can see that your job is actually to do what you must do all the way through this entire painting, is own that these guys, this one here, this distance, is God when it comes to proportions. Even to the extent of giving you the widths. Because all the width is a function of a height. The width has to be right to this. There's no such thing as a sight size width transferred over. It's meaningless. There's no such thing as a transferred height and then a transferred width. What there has to be transferred is a width to height. Okay, and that's relational seeing. So yeah, so you can see that, Dan, that you have to make a good point here, get a good point here, get the angles right, and then get the width right to the total length. And of course, get the angles here right, and get the triangle right, and have the triangle to have its tilt, right? The overall triangle of 3 points. And that's what we call arabesque. It's not as a version of arabesque. There's just several points that aren't really objects. They just make up their own figure. So, and that's significantly, of course, what we're after. Let's see, that's all you meant. Relating points or effects, both in distance and alignment of angle to other points. Yeah, so I've showed you that. The distance thing is kind of interesting because you're making this point here and you make this point here and you say that's the length, and all of a sudden all the other lengths, this one knows who to be. It just has to land in the right place between this and this. And so that's really the master of your lengths, but it has to be something that's actually sort of measurable. You have to draw it to the degree that you can actually see it hold its place, right? So this one might be easier to locate something about this area, or well, probably definitely something about this area because it reads so well. That's a point for you. That line there, though, gives you a very readable length versus this, or in relation to this. So it goes, right? I think you know all that, Dan, so I'm not sure if I should be saying more or if there's more to be said. Oh, the effects thing. So the effects, let's go back to that. So this here, you see this over here is a dark meets a light. Over here, a dark meets a lightish, right? Up here, a dark meets a light. Now you can see the order of the effects. This is a fairly strong effect. This one appears to be slightly stronger, and that's it. This has a feeling of having a greater light effect. So be aware of all these things too. The softness edge, even though the value contrast doesn't appear to be strikingly different from these two, you can see that the edge, the softness, is a big factor in their visual presence. And so those things, in our way of working, those things you'll make as like as you can too right away. Don't just make shapes and work there for weeks and weeks. I mean, you get 2 or 3 things going, but then bring on the mass. One of the things should say to you is that we draw from lines, from outlines, not from outlines, but use lines as points of reference, especially since we want to keep our paper relatively clean so the lights can be brilliant. But so we use a line as a place finder. And then we quickly mask, when we think we're in the right place, we mask a couple of those things so we can see the look of nature. With the look of nature at those points, playing off each other so that it begins to be more and more of a one-to-one with your image, with no attempt to be sight-size. Okay, the third point, ways of seeing more than one thing at a time relating to one, two, or more points. Are there ways of seeing more than one thing at a time? Well, you must actually. I just showed you one, right? I could take another one, see this point as an effect, to this point as an effect, to this point as an effect. If you can see the three of these, you'll see there's literally an order. This one appears to be the darkest of the three. There's an order of values. This one appears to be the sharpest edged of the three. It appears to be, just by a little. And this is the softest one. So you can see if you put the three of them in your eyes at once, you can actually feel what they're doing. And the crucial thing about everything we do is the felt through the eyes. You see, you feel what it's up to, right? And it's a funny thing to say, but try to get your head around that, you guys who've ever tried it. The idea of a feeling for form and all those things is the feel. It's all felt. Everything we talk about is felt. The proportions are felt. And the measurement is actually, to the extent that you can do a measurement that's relational, the measurement is merely an affirmation of the proportion you felt. But you do have to test yourself in your felt locations. But you can see what I mean. So what we do, there's multiple things we do. You sit there and look at the whole, and while you're looking at the whole, you just let these three float in your imagination. But you have to actually walk yourself through what I call the windows, like in a computer language, and so what you do is you actually say, okay, let's look at these three as values. Look at these three as shape types. Let's look at these three as they relate spatially. See the triangle, and each one of those things has its own moment where you need to look at them as a whole, to each other, but with nothing at all. So you back your eyes up a little bit and take in the whole, and let yourself. But you have to figure out how to let yourself see the parts you choose to see without zooming in. Okay. So you just let you see what they're doing together. What they're doing together is an art. I mean, learn to see what they're doing together is a major form, a bit of our form. So yeah, there's different ways of looking. There's expression, look hard at the thing you're not drawing. So if you're trying to get this edge quality right, look hard at nature. Look hard right there at that spot in nature, and be aware of the other one you're trying to draw while you're looking hard at something else, anything else. And both of them will be corrected if you do that, right? So the thing as a whole, multiple things together, and looking hard at the thing you're not looking at. Well, these are just there's just so many strategies. I mean, one of the things we do is we blur our eyes. Well, what do you blur your eyes for? Well, it's to see which are the minor contrasts, so you know what not to include at the start. That's the primary reason. Or if you're not, the positive way of saying it is we're looking for the major effects. But if you blur your eyes at nature and you blur your eyes down a lot, you can barely see, and the things you can barely see are these 2, 3, 4 things, and then you do the same thing looking at your picture. If you don't see the same 3 or 4 things, no more, no less, and with the same sensation when your eyes are blurred down, then your picture is out of visual order. It's not in the same relation. The parts aren't related the same to each other as they are in nature. And remember, again, that's value relations, size relations, all those things. And again, you have to walk yourself thoughtfully through each window. That's why when, Antiguous, when we were talking about, when I stopped thinking, I stopped painting, the mentality of Rembrandt. But you got to be thinking, this all the time you're doing this. You're reviewing, you're saying, I'm doing the proportion thing. Let's just check that, and it's thinking, it's what we think about. Of course, we put it on automatic, so we think about it. We don't even realize how many things you're thinking sometimes. Anyway, so let's go to the next one. Ways to hold or calibrate the brush or charcoal. Calibrate's a funny word, Dan. But I'm going to tell you, there's the things I've expressed to you before in the classroom. I'm going to just talk about the charcoal. The charcoal, if you want to control a charcoal, you don't ever hold it overhanded, or like a pencil. You hold it underhanded. and you're causing yourself to have to bring it intentionally to the paper. And if you get yourself right next to the paper, you can draw with an invisible line, you can draw with a light line, you can draw, and you have so much control, and you can then draw with a line that you can make get darker. But you're not here trying to constantly pull back and just get yourself a light line. You lose control too quickly. You also don't have any. It's all more natural for you to actually use your whole arm, your whole shoulder, your whole. The movement becomes more fluid. The more you're doing something, it doesn't have a muscular sort of crampiness to it. So that's the one thing I can say, and that's where I find I get the best pressure. I was copying a Raphael, a red chalk drawing. I've mentioned it before, but it was one of those things where I was actually trying to see what his marks were, how he made them, so to speak, and how he got those qualities, because it was beautiful to look at as marks. And it took a lot of work for me to, I had to try all kinds of stuff, including different ways of holding the red chalk, to finally be able to get the chalk to do what he was doing. So it takes some thoughtfulness, and don't be thinking it isn't important. That idea of being aesthetic at all times. I mean, touch, the look of the line that you're making isn't insignificant. So that affects, you can easily control the value and that sort of thing. The thickness I'm not as interested in. That's much more to do with line drawing per se. You vary thicknesses of lines more quickly to suggest something, right? And including to suggest weaker and greater contrast, right? So you have a lighter line to suggest less contrast, and a weaker line or a darker line to suggest greater contrast. And fatter and thinner have elements of some of the same other content. So so if I were to say the same thing about the brush, I mean, I hold the brush. Oh, one thing, like this is the same thing, by the way. You have a point holder like this, a charcoal holder. And I follow the same model, though. You might find a point of balance. I like it better at a point of balance rather than at the end. I can control it better because it's not, now again, if I have it at the end, it's going to have weight out there, and I'm trying to actually get it so that I'm the guy that gives it the weight when I want it to be given. So I find myself holding one of these things somewhere near the middle, right? Somewhere nearer there. And you can feel that might give me a different control. So, so when it comes to the brush, I'm holding the brush out here somewhere. I'm not losing the brush in the end of my hand. I'm not that guy. Some people like to do that. There are times when you can, by the way, but I still don't. I basically work with it like this. And even when I'm filling the interstices, I like the feeling. There's more quality of touch. I don't feel like I have the same feeling of touch this way, which I see a lot of people doing. So there's that element of touch. This is more like the pencil thing, but I'm not doing any overhanded stuff. The brush wants to move wherever it wants to move when you're working. So you need it to be, and by the way, you also need it, so you need it to be sort of fluid in your hands. But you need to also hold, in both cases, the charcoal and the brush, you need to hold it with a very light touch. Don't hang on to it. It should be easy for somebody to flick it out of your hand. And but one of the points about the brush, though, is if your pigment is too thick, you won't be able to hold it in any way that will give you any sort of quality of touch. So watch out for that. You need a flowing amount of paint. Somebody asked, I've mentioned before, I think, one of the students asked him how thick the paint should be. And as they were leaving the studios one day for lunch or whatever, he saw a guy painting a wall across the street, and he said, that's how thick your paint should be. That's how much paint you should use. But that's very much the amount to cover, but it's not out of control. And the liquidity of it is quite a factor. And don't be afraid of liquidity as long as it's not slimy and oily and turning liquidy looking on you. You've got to find that place where you have solid paint, but you also have control of the edge. This fat thing right here can make a really incisive, sharp edge. You mass in your whites, you articulate that beautiful edge with your darks. And I can go back for a second talking about this, Dan. The longer, the lines change in their edge quality. So when you get to a brush and you're drawing a long line, if you can manage a shift in an edge, and a sharpness, and then a shift to a softness again with one stroke, that'll be impressive. But watch out for that. That's one of those things where you may not be able to. But watch, because your job is to do the edge, not to come back patching at it later. It's to articulate the look of nature at that spot. Uh, what was there? There was another point there. Oh yeah, and so the other thing about that comes up later actually. So let me just mention that again. Pressure, thickness of line, edge quality. I think so. I think that covers it. Okay, let's go to the next one. And this whole thing is fun. It's a states of mind to help keep me free and clear, to get a concept and retain information rather than stressing and being intimidated, perhaps even experiencing bodily tension. I find that I sometimes experience hand tremor, especially while attempting drawing or cutting edges in crucial sensitive areas. This could be due to nerves, psychological states, medication side effects, or maybe just age. Medication side effects, I used to get it from coffee. I had to stop drinking coffee when I was a student because I'd get up there with my charcoal and my hand would be going like that. And, you didn't even notice it until you started trying to make a precise line. So that can be a factor. On the other hand, I had a friend who was a sign maker who he was suffering some nervous problems, I think because of the lead. I think he told me it was because of the lead that he had ingested over the years. And so he would have a brush. His hand would be like this all the time. I mean, that's just the way he was. But he was showing me how to paint a letter, and he mixed the liquid, down to the paint liquid, really down until it would really flow. And then he took his brush, this wobbly, nasty, floppy brush, and he set it out there. And immediately his hand just went like perfectly firm, and he articulated this incredibly beautiful straight line. I went back to shaking again. But some of that is because your mind already knows what it's up to, right? And the preconceived, the idea of the conceptualizing really helps. Other parts of it are confidence over time that you can do a thing. And again, I suggest that you really want to think confidently. I mean, in other words, do bold things, take chances until you get used to surviving risky behaviors, so to speak, right? These aren't risky in any serious way. But the other part of it is controlling, where you go. So if you actually are going to draw with your darks and you have a nice little mass over here of dark and a light over here, you're going to take this puddle. You're going to have a nice amount of paint in your brush. And you're going to come and have this brush on the canvas. You can feel it. I really live on the feel of the brush on the canvas. It's one of the reasons I like canvas rather than boards. I can feel what's happening better. But you're going to come down there and you're going to move to that place where you've memorized the line, and you're going to come in at it very graciously, take it off nicely, and leave, right? You're going to find a way to do that. And if you're doing it with your arm and you have a preconceived idea, you'll find the confidence is there. But limit yourself. Don't try to draw a line that you can't even manage and go looking back over there to see where the shape was. You can't do that, right? So get a line that even you can manage. A length that's good for you. And sometimes it'll be a greater or lesser one. I would suggest that with a dinky little brush, the need sometimes for your hand to be way in there and a little tiny brush because the area is so small is assumed, but it's not always the case. It's not unusual that you can actually get in there again with the same mentality. Get your brush full of that paint and that into that puddle that's sitting there which I classically put there, right, to work from. And I set that thing in there, and then I get the brush moving on the canvas, and I find my way to that location with a memory, and I just blow off that piece of it, right? But you do have to preconceive. You have to preconceive the edge. You have to already preconceive the shape, the angle, all those things. And you have to have hit the note and know that the note you're putting down there is right. So yeah, that is fun. No, I do find with older age, I have a little more, but as long as you paint enough, usually your muscle tone is pretty good. Yeah, those are my best sort of quick suggestions on those things. Oh, the maul stick. Yeah, you can use a maul stick, but you still want to do the same thing. If you're resting your hand on a maul stick, you still want to actually be thinking about that long, even if it's a short little line, be thinking about getting yourself wet, get into that spot, even using the maul stick, and then having confidence to go ahead and pull off that line, sometimes with less of your arm because it's so small. But other times you can do it with your whole arm and the brush way out here. You can actually articulate that. The idea of putting down a stroke and leaving it is kind of one of those thoughts of the Boston School, isn't it? So yeah, I think that covers it, Dan. And we can, if it doesn't, ask me something more specific. And hopefully we didn't bore everybody else. This is shop talk of the most minute. This is minutia. Anyway, all right. So do subscribe, share, et cetera, et cetera. We're moving along pretty nicely, and make your comments. Interested in hearing more and having further discussions with you all. So, all right, till next time.